There's a common saying that goes, the cheapest Ducati you can buy is going to be the most expensive Ducati you can buy. Well, this right here is the cheapest Ducati that I have ever seen for sale, and today we're going to figure out if I got scammed or if I just got the deal of a lifetime. Behind me here is my Ducati 907IE, a bike most of you guys probably have never heard about because before buying this one, I have never seen or heard of this particular model, nor have I ever seen one since. In fact, the other day I was going to visit one of my bikes currently in restoration, and the mechanic told me he's never even seen a Ducati 907 or had the opportunity to work on one. And they get a lot of bikes in and out of that shop, and in fact they had an 851 just sitting there. Now this bike behind me I bought sight unseen, didn't check the electrical work, and I was told that it doesn't run because of an unknown issue, and I decided to buy it. The reason why people say a cheap Ducati is going to be the most expensive Ducati is because parts add up very quickly and they are very expensive to service. But when I saw this bike and I kind of did an analysis on it, I thought it was worth taking the gamble, because if this bike turns out to be good, well, I just won big time. With that being said, I'm sure many of you are asking, what is the 907? I've never heard of that, I've never seen one. Well, the Ducati 907 was made at the same time as the 851, which many people might be familiar with. The Ducati 851 was the homologated race machine, while this was also being offered for sale at the same time, and it shares many things with the 851. Frame design is very different, but it seems like the motor is very similar, and the whole front end compared to the base 851 seem very, very similar and actually identical, as well as the rear calipers, the rear wheel, and the whole rear suspension setup. The Ducati 907 was first the Ducati 750 Passo. The Passo was made in commemoration to a racer who had passed away, and then it graduated and got updated to the 907 IE. Now, IE doesn't really mean anything too crazy. It just means that this bike is fuel injected instead of the regular carburetors that the bikes had in the past. This bike came out in the early 90s. This particular model is in 1992, and it was kind of the time where a lot of manufacturers were starting to go away from carburetors and dabble with fuel injection. Now, to tell the story of this particular bike, this bike came from down south when my CB404 and my XS650 came up. I've been working on this bike on and off for the last couple of months, trying to find time when I can. Also, the parts are expensive, so I wanted to make sure I bought the right parts when I was buying them. And on top of that, right now there is a lot of shipping problems in the US with the trucker strike and everything, so getting parts hasn't been the easiest, and there's a lot of things I'm still waiting on. Actually, yesterday these finally came in, but these are going to be for the next push that we make. Now, like I was saying, this bike had a mystery problem, and the reason why it was parked for many years. The previous owner didn't do a good job in preserving the bike after the issue had occurred. What the issue is, we have literally no idea. One day it was running, the next day it wasn't. So there could be a problem with the ECU, there could be a problem with the fueling, there could be a problem with something else that we have no idea with, and I didn't even know if the bike would turn over with the starter or do anything. Now, the other thing I was told was the fact that all the fluids were drained out of the bike other than the engine oil. So I thought, you know, maybe it was preserved properly and I could get away with simply fixing one small thing and the bike would fire up. But that fact came to bite me pretty hard, and thus began the journey of trying to get this bike back on the road. So the very first thing any sane person would do with this bike is hook it up to a battery and see if any electrical system would come to life. Luckily, when I put the battery into the bike not only had all of the lights light up, but the starter actually worked and turned over the machine. What that meant is I can spray some starting fluid directly into the throttle body, which lived under the tank, to see if the bike would turn over and fire up. Because the thought process was, if it fires with starting fluid, the problem that kept the bike from running was probably a fuel related problem, whether it was the fuel filter or perhaps the fuel pump failed. Those things could have contributed to the problem of why the bike was parked in the first place. Now, when I purchased this machine, it did not have the tank on the bike, and if you guys are also the observant viewers, you can see that it's missing all of the fairings, which we'll talk about in a second. Before I show you the bike, can we just talk about how massive this gas tank is? I mean, compare that with my hand. This tank is huge. But underneath this air box under the tank lives the throttle body. So I popped the air box open and we sprayed some starting fluid directly into it, and this is what happened. At this point, we got some early build motivation. We know the bike sounds amazing, has a super deep grunt because of these aftermarket pipes that are on it. I do have the originals as well, which is super awesome. So knowing that the bike is going to run, we began dissecting and jumping into it and seeing what could have been the problem and all the things we need to do. The very first problem we wanted to jump into was the fuel system. The tank was off of the bike, but inside of the tank, you can see it was very rusty. Now luckily we did a little bit of a before, but this is the after of going through and cleaning it one time. There's still a little rust and sediment, but we can see that this tank will clean up. But down there you can see the other problem we're having, and the fact that that fuel pump is stuck to the bottom of the tank because it has an inboard one instead of one that lives on the side. With the first tank cleaning, I did distilled water, distilled vinegar, let it sit, and it really ate through a lot of the rust. It's important to take the vinegar out of the tank and not leave it in there for extended periods of time. It definitely did its job, and we're gonna have to do it again. And this time I'm gonna try some evapor rust because it's not as bad as it was before. Fingers crossed that does the trick. The inside of the tank will be clean. And right now I've been waiting for a fuel filter and fuel pump for quite some time, and I hope they show up in the relatively near future. But in the meantime, the other major problems we are having is the fact that the brake master cylinder and the clutch master cylinder were not building pressure whatsoever. Now, just a quick tip, if you're flushing brake fluid out of the system, it's very important that you flush the master cylinder and the brake lines and even the calipers of the brake fluid. Brake fluid is hydroscopic, meaning it absorbs water. And that's what happened to the clutch master cylinder, the brake lines, and even the calipers. The brake fluid that remained turned into a gunk and absorbed moisture and became like a glue, and it clogged up everything. Now we have to rebuild the master cylinders and we have to rebuild the calipers. So we decided to start with the rear caliper, which was actually in better condition than the rest of the bike. It has these tiny little pads. These are brand new pads for the rear of a 907 and an 851. The system seemed to be working and building pressure, but a big problem we had is the brake line was completely rotted from the inside. We tried cleaning out the brake line, but ended up damaging it and puncturing a hole into it, which meant I had to get all new lines. Something I should have just done anyway, so those came in yesterday and they'll be part of the next big push that we make. Front master cylinder, we did rebuild, completely disassemble, and tried putting it back together, but I waited forever for new seals to come for the inside of it to completely rebuild everything. Once again, another part that's been on order for a long time that just has never shown up. So after these are rebuilt, the calipers are rebuilt, we have new lines, the whole brake system should be good to go, which means that the last and final thing we have to do is the fuel system. Did, however, pull the old fuel pump out, and well, it seems like it is pretty clogged, so this could be another or one of the many problems that this bike was having, which were fuel related. Now to talk about where the rest of the bike is, where the fairings are, I have an aftermarket seat, I have the factory seat, as well as all of the fairings, including a new right side fairing or left side fairing. At one point or another, this bike had the left side fairing damaged, and I have the original one, but I also have a brand new one from Ducati, which they actually don't make anymore, but the guy bought it, put it on the side, and luckily I was able to get everything. And it has these aftermarket mufflers, which are made in Australia. And if I'm reading them correctly, they say stain tune on them. They sound amazing, and I'm gonna definitely keep them on the bike. Another thing about this bike is the fact that it doesn't have a dry clutch, but it actually does have a wet clutch, which separates itself from a lot of Ducatis from the time, because if you don't know, Ducatis make that chatter noise, which sound like the bikes are broken, but it's actually just the dry clutch. This one has a wet clutch, doesn't make that noise, so we can hear that beautiful motor noise even more. After the brake system, after we get the fuel system figured out, the next thing to do is to replace the timing belts, and we're also going to have to figure out whether the cooling system's working or not. I want to get the bike on the road and running one time before we do anything, and before we do the timing belts, I just want to hear it and put it in gear, ride it up and down, and then get to the belts. The bike only has 9,000 miles, so it's not technically due for a valve service or due for a timing belt service, but with age, it's a good thing to replace because they're probably original. And that is something we definitely will do, but it's going to be a service we do after the bike is fully running. Another cool thing I'll mention about this bike is the fact that it has white wheels, and they're actually made by Brembo. I never knew that Brembo made wheels. Comment that down below if that's a common thing, but I suppose I've never owned a Ducati. This is my first ever Ducati, and well, it's definitely taught me a lot about the bikes from the 90s era from Italy. Also, the 907 has this very weird frame design. I've never seen this on any other bike because usually they have the trellis frames, but this has like a square tubed frame and it's weird. Never seen it before. If anyone knows why they did this, comment that down below. If you have any other information on the Passo, things I should do, things I might be overlooking, because there's not that much information out on these bikes. They're pretty rare. Luckily, it shares a lot of parts with the 851. We have a lot of other projects that are back there that I cannot wait to get to in early 2025. This is the big red machine that I've been hiding. Let me know what you guys think, and as always, if you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.